On. Here in this Tara temple, also the live streaming. This is the fourth session, scientific session in the Wellness Week here. My name is Rogier Hoenders. I'm a psychiatrist and professor at the university in the Netherlands, in Holland. And today I'd like to talk with you about facing your dragon in the underworld, about psychotherapy and also about psychedelics. So we have about 1 hour and a half. I will be talking about 1 hour and we'll have some time for questions as well. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start with the essence. Who are we? And what are we? I would say we are humans, as far as I can tell. Not sure about everyone, but we are made up of a body and a mind. And sometimes we talk about, a little bit like with pride, that we are the top of the evolution, the crown of creation. And we pride ourselves on being the most successful animals, very superior to other ones. We are very conscious, autonomous, rational mind, right? Not really, huh? So I think we are mostly unconscious, we are mostly full of contradictions, and we are very irrational. This is really our lives. We tell ourselves stories which are very rational, about things which are irrational. And that's important also for our mental health. So I'd like to look at it from a more detailed perspective. Okay, let's start with the mind. So the mind, human mind, we have quite a crazy mind. I'm not sure about you, but my mind is going up and down all the time. Now we call this monkey mind. We have about, if you look at research, there's a little bit discussion, but we have about 40 to 70,000 thoughts each day. But the interesting part is that 80 to 90% are the same thoughts as yesterday and also the same as tomorrow. So we are not very original. We keep on repeating the same thoughts. And on top of that, most of it is negative. Negative in the sense of we are not happy with how life has been, and it should have been different. So we have resentment about things that happened, and we have either desire or fear for the future. And that means that we spend our lives, what Lama Michel calls re-suffering about what has happened before, or pre-suffering what may happen, but usually doesn't happen. So we suffer for the fears and we suffer for the projections which usually will not even be present in our life. And that's a very interesting thing. Then on top of that, we are still, in science, we don't know how this mind of us is related to the body. There's a lot of discussion, there are many theories, but there is no consensus in the world how body and mind interact. Let's focus on one part of the body, the brain. So there's a question sometimes, maybe you see it on the internet. We still don't know how consciousness arises from the activity of brain cells. Maybe you heard about this. I think this is a wrong question. Because the question in itself presumes that it starts with brain activity and consciousness will follow from that. That's an assumption. We don't have any science for that. So the better question would be, how are body and brain, or body and mind, brain and mind, how are they related? It's one of the biggest questions of science. And the interesting part is, when you put in Google, you put in what is mind, what do you see? Which kind of images? The brain. Because we think that mind and brain are here and are mostly the same, which I don't think is true. And so there's a very funny story. Many, many years ago, I think it was in the 80s, there was a famous researcher who started working together with His Holiness the Dalai Lama to do research on changes in the brain and in the mind during meditation. So he went with the whole team to Dharamsala in India, where His Holiness was, and there was a big thing. So hundreds of monks there. Everybody looking excitingly at the stage, and they would show with scientific research what happens during compassion meditation. So there's a monk there, scientist there, and the monk starts doing his compassion meditation. And the scientists go on the stage and they start making these little, these threads of EEG. It's like measuring the electricity of the brain. The moment they start making these threads here, everybody starts laughing. So hard. Rolling on the ground of laughing. Because what are these crazy scientists? You want to measure compassion and you go here, you don't go here. Everybody knows that compassion is not in the head, it's in the heart. So in the Tibetan tradition, the mind is both here and here. And in the Western tradition, it's only here. So that's an interesting thing. I think we have to make friends between the two of them. Then it's the best result coming. Okay, so that's the first start of the mind. Let's now look at the other organ. Of course, there is an interaction between mind and brain, for sure. I think it's both ways, but it's there. And Elkena just came in. Elkena, the first night on Monday, Elkena explained that the brain is only very small. It's only 2% of our body weight. So it's only about 1 or 2 kilograms. But it takes 25% of all the oxygen and the energy. That's not fair. How about the lungs and the kidneys and the muscles? So the brain is selfish in a way, because it takes by itself so much of the energy. Now, why is that? Anybody has a suggestion? Yes, very good. It's always working. Thank you very much. Perfect answer. That was what I was looking for. So, yes, our mind, like we started, the mind is like a monkey mind going up and down all the time. So this is an image of our brain function where there's activity between brain cells. So this is the whole brain. You see everything is talking to everything. And so in a normal state, which means like our normal suffering human existence, then the mind is constantly going on. And this is related to some specific areas in our brain which are called the default mode network, DMN. And this is, well, you can forget the specific places in the cortex and lobes, but the most important thing is it is the correlate, it's the brain correlate of our monkey mind. So in the mind, it's the monkey mind. In the brain, it's the default mode network. And it's constantly active. So about 10 years ago, there were some scientists, and they were very interested in the brain and in the use of energy. So they thought, okay, let's do an experiment. One person can just sit down and relax. Just do nothing. Just be there. And the other person was instructed to do a very difficult mathematical test. So you need to be concentrated. And then they were interested to see how much more energy the person would use who was concentrated. What happened? It was not even the same, it was less. So it turns out that we have so much activity normal in our brain, the default mode network, that is using all this energy it's abusing energy. And when you start concentrating, you lose less energy. That was a very interesting first result. So less. And then there was even one step further. You could do something which makes you even more efficient, even less energy. What was that? Meditation. So normally we use 25% of energy. If you do a very specific task, very much concentrated, it's less. When you do meditation, it's even less. So we are more efficient in using our brain and our energy. Okay. And then it's important, usually in most cases, this monkey mind going up and down all the time, we call it also mind wandering. It's the default mode network. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So the more we have this jumping up and down and this using of energy, it's usually correlated to anxiety and depression. But there's one example, especially for you, Duccio. It's creativity. So a very active default mode network is also related to creativity. But usually it's in a way that is bad for our mental health, where you see anxiety and depression. So I started with, we are sometimes a little bit arrogant, feeling we are the crown of creation, the top of evolution, like the best animal on earth, but we have a lot of problems. And that's because most of our lives is not so conscious. And this is the main image of today. As you know, this is an iceberg. And this is a very good metaphor for our mind. So there's the surface, the water surface is over there. So only this part of our mind is conscious. 5 to maybe 10%, 90% is unconscious. But it has a huge effect on how we feel and what we do. So mental health is mostly determined by forces which are out of reach and out of sight of our daily conscious awareness. So all of these things going on here deep in our mind are affecting how we feel and what we do, but we don't see them, we cannot grasp them. At least not when we are aware, when we are in an active mode. What kind of forces are that? Trauma, repeating conflicts, impulses, habits, and rumination. These are some of the examples of things which are deep in our mind, which we usually cannot be aware of, but who have a large effect on how we feel, on our mental health. If that's the case, how do we get there? Because if this is the origin of our mental health, you like to be there, right? You don't want to be on top of the iceberg. Maybe you have a nice view, but you don't have access to these forces which make us feel happy or unhappy. Well, I would like to take you on a journey this evening, a journey to the unconscious. And I will start with a story. I start with storytelling. And then we go to a more practical, more therapeutic approach. But I'd like to start with this. So, did anyone hear about the hero's journey? 1, 2, 3, 4? Okay. So this is a story told by Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell was a writer and a mystical, and he was very much fascinated by how our lives develop. And mostly in the sense of myths and legends. So he was there as a young man in about, I think it was 1920, and he didn't have a job, and he wanted to write. And then the Great Recession hit. Maybe you know the economic recession, especially in the United States and America in 1929, I think it was. And so, but nobody had a job. So he thought, what I'm going to do with my life? And he decided to go and to be very disciplined and read 9 hours a day, 5 days a week, all year round. And he did this for 5 years. So he read thousands of books. And he was mostly interested in this aspect. He was not so much interested in our conscious life. He was mostly interested in the deep forces, like the unconscious, unexplained, not even manifested forces. So this is why he read about fairy tales, about folklore, about legends, and so he had a specific connection to Ireland. So the story he liked most was King Arthur. This you know, right? King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table? Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is one story. And there are so many more. But during this time, when he was reading all these stories and he was looking for a job, he thought, okay, I want to be a writer. And so he looked into all of these tales, and then suddenly he found a book by a very famous man, James Joyce, and he wrote a book called Finnegan's Wake. And it was a very difficult to read book, but was very rich, with a lot of stories about Ireland, and about the time of King Arthur and the knights and dragons there, and all different very exciting stories. So he thought, if I find it difficult to read, most people are not into these stories, they cannot read, so I'm going to make a commentary. That's interesting, no? Because we are here in a Tibetan temple, and what do we hear often? That La Michelle is explaining a commentary of a commentary of a commentary of a commentary of Nagarjuna or Lama Tsongkhapa or famous writers, right? So this guy, Joseph Campbell, did kind of the same. He also wrote a commentary to make it more accessible for the people of his time. But he was not well known and he was poor, and so he went to the publisher and he was not interested. Then he went to another publisher and he was not interested. And there was another publisher and he was not interested. So there he was with his beautiful book, what to do. And he was living in New York at the time. Then out came a very famous musical on Broadway. It was a big hit, like a kind of like a Titanic movie, like that. And so he was a little bit bored, so he said, okay, I'll look at the movie. So he looks at the movie, he says, wow, this is the story. They stole the story of this Irish man and make it into a very famous Broadway movie. And nobody knew because they couldn't read the book. But he knew, because he knew all of these stories. So he writes a letter to the New York Times. He says, listen guys, this was stolen, this famous Broadway. And he said, wow, you have some evidence? He said, yes, I can show you. So he writes a letter and everybody excited, but then they forget about it. And so time goes on. And then they make a lot of money with this musical. And then they decide to write a book about it as well. The book comes out, and then he says, now I got you. Because he could show, page by page, everything that was stolen from the original book. So he found 250 pages and lines where it was stolen. Again, a letter to the New York Times, and again, everybody excited. And then this guy said, well, you are good in these things. Do you have something written by yourself? And he says, actually, I have. And so he became a famous writer. So this is just the introduction to Joseph Campbell. Now let's look at the story, because there was something, he found something which is kind of incredible. It's really incredible. Because he read all of these stories for 9 years, 5 years, 9 hours a day. And when he looked at all of these stories from all different cultures and times, all of a sudden there was like a kind of, like a moment of eureka, like a realization. And suddenly he saw that it's only one story. There's the one story of humans, which has been told in different languages, with different symbology, different characters, but it's always more or less the same. And then he realized, if so many cultures, so many writers all around the world in all these years came to the same story, this must refer to our mind. It must explain something about who we are as humans. So he called it the hero's journey. And I'm going to tell you the story now. And I'm sure that you already know it, but you are not aware of it. Because we are not aware of 95% of our things, right? So let me start with you on this story. How does it start, a good story? What's the first thing that happens? The call to adventure. Something happens. Something that you know, I have to do it. Maybe it's an email from Albagnano Healing Meditation Center explaining a retreat. Can be. But it can also be that your name is Harry Potter and there are coming all these different letters coming into your mailbox. Or maybe you are Alice in Wonderland and you see a white rabbit going down the hall. Do you know this? Yes, thank you. So there are many stories about how people get the call. The call can also be difficulty or even sickness. So in many healing traditions, it's very well known in shamanism that somebody who is called to be a healer first manifests disease. And when he is treated or she is treated, then she can become a shaman. So the first point is a call to adventure. And there is something about this call, because when the call hits you, you know things will not be the same anymore. After this, my life will be changed. There's like a deep feeling of importance, but also fear and tension. And so, what happens after the call? What do you do when your phone rings? Sometimes we answer, sometimes we don't, right? You just switch it off. So the refusal of the call is mostly the second step. Why refusal? Because you think, I'm not sure about this. Everything might change in my life. My identity might even die, which is true in a way also. So the refusal of the call is there. And you have to make a choice, whether you take it or not. And so maybe you know from the Matrix. Remember? The red pill or the blue pill? This is also a call to adventure and deciding, do you answer the call or no? And if you don't, in mysticism, the nice thing is anything can happen. So also with the call, if you don't take the call, sometimes it dies. So the sound just becomes weaker and the opportunity is lost. In other stories, the call gets stronger and it can manifest as disease. As something hits you that you have to listen. So in Harry Potter, it was not himself but his family who refused his call. They tried to take away the letters. Do you remember the story? Nobody see this movie? Okay. So what happens? Thousands of letters are coming by magic force. And then they force the family to let him answer his call. So this is the second step. So you are there, you are the hero to be, and you are thinking, am I going to take all the road to Mordor? Something like that. Or Pandora, if you like. I'm going to go there. That's the second step, the refusal of the call. But then if we gather all our strength and our courage and we take the call, what happens? Help arises. Help can arise in many different ways. But usually you get something which is kind of unfair, so you have special force. Harry Potter has a wand, like a magic stick, right? And Frodo has a ring. And King Arthur has a magical sword. It's all the same. It's something of magic that will help you later in the story. And also helpers and allies arise. So people who will help you on your way. Here in Albagnano we call this Sangha. These are also allies, which give you strength to carry on with your life if things get difficult. And in Star Wars, may the Force be with you. It's a little bit cheating. No, you have special force to make it. Okay, so then you are there. You said, okay, I'm going to take the call. Here's my special power. Here are my allies. And now I'm going for it. So what happens? You go into the underworld. Because the most difficult tasks that we have to face and the battles we have to win are not in the conscious world, but are down in the underworld. And it usually is a very big task, so you need special forces to conquer it. But the decision is, okay, I'll do it. So what do you do when you're Alice? You follow the rabbit and you fall down in the hole, remember? Next to the tree. So, okay, there you go. Or Jonas the whale. Remember this story? Jonas went into the belly of the whale. It's the same. You surrender to an entrance and you go into a hole or into Pandora, the story of Avatar. Remember? He goes to sleep and he goes to Pandora. It's the same. You go to a different world. But what's most important, the rules are different in the underworld. So Alice can become big or small. And when you want to do something, you don't get information, you get a riddle. You need to solve the riddle and you can go on. So everything is different in the underworld. And there, why are you there? Why are you in the underworld? You have a series of tasks to accomplish. So you get tested there. Your strength gets tested, your courage gets tested. And you have to conquer these kind of monsters there. This is of course this is your own monster inside of you. It's your own difficulty. And so you need to surrender, and even, it's similar to Tantra, you even have to die. Not really completely die, but you have to let go of the old identity and go in the underworld, death, and then there you have to get through all of these tasks. So, okay, surrender is there. We pass the threshold. Then there's a little difficulty. Sometimes there are beings next to the entrance and they say, you are not going on an adventure. You stay with me. We were not married in this way, for instance. Can be a partner. Or can be the holders of the old tradition. So if you like complementary medicines, it can be the anti-quackbusters or the conventional doctors opposing you. Can be anything. But these are forces either outside, can also be forces inside. So if we have like a limiting thought in cognitive behavioral therapy, we look at limiting thoughts we can have about ourselves, which limit us to take action. This is also a keeper of the old tradition. So you try to go through this, and then if you manage to pass them, you are there, And then you are on the road of trials. And the road of trials means you are going to be tested in a series of events to make it. Like Frodo was going to Mordor, remember? And he was sometimes attacked. And then he was cheated. And then people tried to steal the ring. And then they wanted to kill him. And all of these things. This is the road of trials. And the interesting thing is that sometimes in this story, when you are there and you take the step, you go down, then you can meet your life partner. That can be the man or the woman, depending on your own attraction or interest. But it's the sexual partner who you are attracted to, which gives you energy and gives you the bliss to be able to continue on the journey. So meeting your partner can be a very important step, but it can also be a distraction. So the other one can be either helping or lead you off the trail into a nice bliss, but you're not doing the thing you were supposed to do. So you need to stay on the path.
You don't know if he's one or the other.
You don't. No, you have to trust your instincts. Because if you rest in the bliss, then you are not there. So either the temptress or the goddess, in other words. And this is very similar to psychiatry, because these kind of forces, we call this the Oedipus complex. Remember, Freud said that young boys like to kill their father and marry their mother? This is similar to this story. There's also a female one, it's called Electra complex. This is the woman who wants to kill her mother and marry her father. Same story. But then, if you want to go for that, the moment you are tempted in this direction, then fear comes. Because if I want to kill my father and marry my mother, the wrath of the father, the atonement of the father can be there. And we have this kind of primal fear of being corrected and being punished. It's deep in us. And if you are a parent, maybe you have used it already. Wait till daddy comes home. It's a way to keep people in their place, keep the children and to manipulate them. Well, it's from a good source, I think, but anyway. And then what happens is the apotheosis. So you have all these difficulties, and then finally what is there is a dragon. And the dragon is the personification of your biggest fear, your biggest challenge, your biggest trauma, which you have to conquer and get through. And if you manage to do that, what do you get? The prize. You get like the biggest prize of all. For Buddha, it was enlightenment. He conquered the Maras, which was his dragon, and then he managed for enlightenment. But there are many different ways you can do that. The dragon can also be a person like Sauron in Harry Potter, no, in the Ring, and Darth Vader in Star Wars. Remember, these are the personifications of evil. Then you get it, and of course, a nice story also about what you get when you pass the dragon is the quest for the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is like a story in Christianity about the cup of Christ. People go for that. That's the prize they win when they get through all of these difficulties. And then, when you manage to do that, you get this prize, and then you want to take it with you and go back. But there are always forces which try to keep the treasure there. So you have, again, to pass through all of these different forces. People who try to take you back. So maybe you remember one of these movies of Harry Potter. Some of his friends were underwater. They were tied up, and he had to release them. I'm not sure if you've seen this. And when he tried to do that, he himself was being pulled back by these creatures which tried to fight him. So that means that if you want to do the good thing, there are always forces which oppose you and you have to get through them. And if you manage to do that, then you get back, then you have a magic flight, you get back into the upper world, then you bring your prize and you are able to do something in this life. And after that, you can even go back in the underworld whenever it's needed to regain your strength and go up again. But the commitment to go back again is in our spirituality, in Tibetan Buddhism, is the vow of the Bodhisattva to come back to life as long as people are suffering. It's the same story. Everything is connected to each other. And if you manage to do that, then you are a master of both worlds, and you can return anytime you like to be able to help people. So, to give you the summary of this story, it's here. And of course, it's a circle because you can go again and again in life. So you have the call to adventure, I explained to you. People are helping, but also the supernatural aids, like the sword and the ring are there, the refuse of the call. Then you go down the rabbit hole with Alice, or in the belly of the whale. Then you have all these trials, all the difficulties, people helping you, people tempting you, people fighting you. Then you have the biggest fight with the dragon. Then you are transformed because of all of these experiences. You bring back new insights and energy, you bring it to the world, and then you can go back again. This story is called also the monomyth, and it's so powerful that ever since this book was published, they say that there's no story, no movie whatsoever, which was not somehow related to this story. So, this is something about our mind, and now I'd like to make a bridge to mental health and psychiatry. How can we use this for healing? So, I think it's safe to say that getting into touch with this underworld and all the dragons which are there, in fact, it's altered states of consciousness. It can bring a lot of healing by making the unconscious conscious, by dealing with your trauma, with your conflicts. And the question is, how do we go there? Because we are not Alice or Harry, for that matter. How do we go in this underworld? How do we access it? Well, there are psychotherapies. These are the most well-known psychotherapies in psychology and psychiatry. And many of them have some kind of technique, of aspect to deal with your dragon in the underworld. Of course, they don't use this language. They call it differently. But Freud looked, of course, in the unconscious and looked at sex and aggression as primal forces. Beck and Adler had about cognitive behavioral therapy. Client-centered therapy of Rogers is more in the relationship. Frankl looked at meaning, Bowlby at systems. And of course there was hypnosis long time ago, and more recently we have EMDR, like the trauma therapy, or as sounds. And if you look at the way how they use it, it's bringing something either to the surface, which is unconscious, or using something to connect different parts of the brain. And I think this is very interesting, but if you look from the eyes of the hero's journey, you look differently at all these psychotherapies. But these altered states of consciousness, this underworld, you can access it in many different ways. Actually, we are all accessing it every 24 hours, because even sleep is an altered state of consciousness. It also happens in a pathological way with epilepsy and with brain damage. Then people have an altered state of consciousness. For instance, an accident in the traffic and then you go into coma. This is a pathological altered state of consciousness. But also when you sleep, when you don't eat, fasting can lead to an altered state of consciousness. Sex also. It is a non-cognitive state, an experience that brings you to an altered state. But there's also a lot of psychological interventions usually used in traditional cultures. The Indians, the Aboriginals, the Eskimos, they all have their different ways to have an altered state of consciousness with music, hypnosis, sweat lodge, many different rituals. Then there's spontaneous altered states of consciousness, daydreaming, people who have a near-death experiences, people who almost die, they have very strong experiences which are in contact with the unconscious. Medication and of course psychedelics also, but not mainly. And I don't know about here in Italy, but in Holland this is kind of a hype now. Everybody likes to be interested in psychedelics. Is it true also here or no? Do you know what are psychedelics? Who knows one psychedelic? LSD? Yes? Yes. Magic mushrooms also, yes. So I will explain some of them more. So psychedelics means to reveal the mind. These are substances taken for more than 6,000 years by different cultures all around the world to dive into inner space. So we are used to exploring outer space as astronauts and space programs, but this is diving into inner space. And in the Western world, it was the interest came in 1938 by Hoffman, who by accident he was working in a laboratory, and by accident he made LSD, and he had the first hallucinations and different experiences. And then there was quite a strong thing were happening as many people used the strength of psychedelics to go against the established authorities. So Timothy Leary said, turn on, tune in and drop out, which was, it was in the time of the hippies and the Vietnam War. So he was saying, turn on, take your psychedelics, tune in to your deeper world and drop out of the system. So go against the system. Go against the war in Vietnam, all of this. And this was one of the main reasons why these substances were prohibited later by the United States government in 1970. And it took more than 20 years before research began again, and it became more accepted. And now, again, we see a new revival of the psychedelics. So here are a few of them. LSD, this is a classical type. Peyote, this is made from the cactus in Middle America. Psilocybin, this is magic mushrooms. DMT, which is also in ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a mixture of two plants in Amazon. Then there are the atypical ones. Ketamine is not a natural substance. This is a medicine for anesthesia, but it's also a psychedelic. This is ibogaine from Africa. Well, pot and marijuana most people know. Then there's of course ecstasy or MDMA, and there are the new ones with the difficult chemical types. These are all substances which reveal the mind. So they show us sometimes hallucinations, hearing voices, music, seeing angels. Everything changes in your perception. And this can be healing, but can also be dangerous. And in some cultures it's quite used a lot. So we see here, this is from the 1980s in America. This is the percentage of the population. So you see, I was kind of impressed that already about 10 years ago, almost 1 in 10 Americans was using LSD. I think it's quite high. Know what you think? Maybe here as well. And this is in red. And magic mushrooms, about 9% of the population. Then there's mescaline and peyote less. But almost 1 in 10 in the population has some kind of experience with it. And then, this is a very important point, because these substances, they help us to get into a different state of consciousness, a different way of experiencing ourselves in the world. But it is not only the substance itself. What's very important is they call this the 7S model. It is also your mindset. So it means that the way you are prepared for taking this substance, the intention you have, the expectations you have, they are also very important in the outcome of taking psychedelics. And the setting is also important. So usually people don't take psychedelics when they are working in an office. They take this at night, at the campfire, or in the nature. So the setting is important. It has to be night and dark. Then the substance itself has an effect, of course. The dosage, so how much you take, but also the one, I'm sorry, this is still in Dutch. The trip sitter means the one who's guiding the ceremony. So the one who is leading the ceremony is also important in the effect, of course. Then there's the safety, and there's the personal part, because what's very interesting about these events, people take psychedelics, and even though they are in the same room with the same people, the same sitter, the same intention, the same substance, they can have a very different effect. So there's also the personal aspect of it. And all of these 7 have an effect of what you experience. The interesting thing for why am I excited about it, or why do I think it's important? Because in psychiatry, we are more or less in a kind of bardo state. Like we are, or like almost for like 40, 50 years, not much has changed. We don't have really breakthroughs in medication, we don't have really breakthroughs in psychotherapy, but psychedelics are different. They are a whole different ballgame, because they really have a strong effect. So to give you one example, most of the people who have their first psychedelic experience, they rate it as one of the 5 most important experiences in their lives. So it's not something just like some kind of therapy, it's kind of strong. And one of my colleagues, who is a psychiatrist, he was never very much into ecological or vegetarian or these kind of things. He took psychedelics, magic mushrooms, and then he had all-night visions about how we treat animals in our culture. How they suffer because of how we raise them, how we kill them, how we eat them. And he became what is now well known as an overnight vegetarian. And this happens more to people, that they have such a strong experience that overnight they stop, and it has now been 12 years. He has not eaten meat again ever since. And that's strong, because most interventions to change your lifestyle, change your habit, it's kind of difficult to do. But they report with psychedelics some strong changes. So it has great potential, but everything that can be good can also be bad. So what happens? What is tripping? It means the experience of the outer world, exteroception, and the inner world changes. We have different sensory inputs, so like seeing things, hearing, touching, smelling. Emotions change. Memory can go back. Things can come back to your memory which you thought you forget. Your sense of time, your sense of identity can change. And strange thoughts, even strange movements, all of these things can happen during this kind of tripping. So here is one of the way of putting it into a model. So there's a pharmacological way. So for instance, serotonin and dopamine are changed. We also see it's anti-inflammatory. So inflammatory processes. I think Anna Fossi yesterday told about inflammation and chronic disease, right? So there's a lot to do about this. And psychedelics seem to be able to diminish the inflammation response. And that's one of the aspects of their healing potential. This is one suggestion that's made. There's a lot of neurological things in the brain involved, but we see mostly on the psychological level. So mystical experiences, feeling of awe, ego dissolution, different emotions, psychological flexibility, creativity, mindfulness, many different things. And then when I was reading this, I thought it's kind of interesting that a lot of things we do in Tibetan Buddhism and Tantra have similar aspects. It's a loss of identity. It's kind of, you have to die to build up again. You have a different way of seeing the world, mystical experiences, altered states of perception, creativity, mindfulness, meaning, etc. is all there. So I think that you could say psychedelics is for the ones who like to do meditation but are a little bit lazy. So you can take and you have strong experiences, whereas with meditation you need to put a lot of effort to have the same effects. So why do people use psychedelics? It's because of therapeutic aspect. I will explain more later. Recreative, people who are just like to have a nice weekend. I don't know here, but like in many cities in Europe, Amsterdam for instance, many people, they do this as like a weekend, to spend their weekend, taking psychedelics together. Can also be taken for personal development and of course for religious or spiritual meaning, which is in most traditional cultures. So to make it very specific, what is now being used in psychiatry for what indications? For PTSD, we now see quite some evidence that for trauma, ecstasy, together with psychotherapy, is very effective. This is mostly researched in veterans, people with war experiences and who have nightmares and other symptoms of PTSD. This seems to work. Then for therapy-resistant depression, we have magic mushrooms. It's kind of impressive. We see many studies when people who are depressed for 10 years, they take for 6 weeks mushrooms and they get out of the depression. And the numbers are quite high. Still needs to be replicated, but there seems to be a strong effect there. So it's a new medicine for depression, a new one for trauma. And LSD and also psilocybin seem also to work against obsessive-compulsive disorder. There is evidence. Then there is ketamine for depression, and we see psychedelics are also used in terminal patients. So people who are afraid of dying, people who have pain with cancer, they use it for anxiety for death and depression. And very interesting, people usually associate psychedelics with addictive behavior, but actually it's a medicine against addiction. So they use psychedelics to treat alcoholism and addiction to nicotine and cluster headache. So these all have quite some evidence. It's not being applied in every hospital yet, but I think it will come in the next years. Okay, so there's a lot of potential. Is it safe to take? I would say everything that can be healing can also be dangerous. It's almost always the case. So here probably also. But still, if you compare the total level of risk of LSD and magic mushrooms compared to alcohol, nicotine, heroin and crack, you can see that most psychedelics are less dangerous than the hard drugs and the old school cocaine, etc. So yes, there are risks. People can have flashbacks or bad trips, or maybe it can even luxate psychosis, but on average it is not so dangerous as the ones we already know here. Okay, but then again, I already mentioned, you can also trip without psychedelics. So if you like to trip and you are afraid of the psychedelics, these are the things I already mentioned, matching rituals, rhythm, dance, sweat, music, holotropic breathing, sex, sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, and meditation, of course. So all of these interventions can also help you for an altered state of consciousness and a trip. Okay, so if you like to learn more and more details and also more references If you have Netflix, there's a nice documentary, The Last Shaman. Also, there's a book, but also a documentary on Netflix on Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind. Also about it. Listen to ayahuasca, iboga nights. There's a lot of things on the internet. So you can take a look there and see for yourself. And something that they say when you go on traveling now has a different meaning when you say, have a good trip. So, thank you for your attention. Any objections, questions, comments? We have to use a microphone.
Translation, yes. Thank you. Allora, innanzitutto grazie perché è bellissimo, chiarissimo. Qual è la tua esperienza sull'uso della cannabis nel lungo periodo? In Italia si sta diffondendo moltissimo come analgesico, ma anche per forme medio-basse, però dolori cronici che comunque sono un problema. Nel lungo termine, calcolando anche la necessità di aumentare la dose, perché progressivamente è necessario aumentare. Cosa pensi? Qual è la tua esperienza?
Okay, I think I understood, but let me just check with people who really understand Italian. So I think your question is with cannabis, the medical use of it, and what are the effects over a longer period of time, right? Yeah, progressive increasing the dosage over time. Yes. So I think this is an area of large discussion and controversy, because again, you see that people are more open-minded and a little bit anti-establishment. They really embrace cannabis, and people who are more inside the system are a little bit reluctant. It's still happening. But yes, there's evidence for cannabis with chronic pain, mostly. And it's very effective. And yes, our brain has the ability to adapt. We call this neuroplasticity, right? So everything that we do for a longer period of time somehow changes our cells in our brains. And so if you take almost any kind of substance for a longer period of time, there's an adaptation process going. And it differs by the substance you take. So for instance, things like sleeping pills, people are very easily adapted to it, and you need very strongly more dosage. With cannabis, it is less the case, but it's still a little bit the case. So most people who take it for a longer period of time need to increase a little bit. And then there is a danger of apathy, so no energy anymore to do things. And also I see sometimes a little bit kind of paranoia things. Doesn't really have to be psychosis, but sometimes people get a little bit detached from the world and a little bit uncomfortable with other people. So these kind of side effects can happen, especially over time. And so this is my concerns. But I think if you look at the alternatives we have for chronic pain, the opioids, it's much worse. So in that regard, it has a place. Yeah.
May I add?
Yes, please.
There is worldwide quite a lot of research done on the effects of cannabis, medicinal cannabis, and especially also in the field of oncology. You mentioned chronic pain, and actually cannabis is a very interesting, let's say, substance, because it consists of more than 400 different aspects that can activate in our body. And it looks like that we used this cannabis already for thousands of years as a medicinal plant. And we have inside of our body receptors to generate actually the same substance that the cannabis plant is making, and we make this also by ourselves. So we know that cannabis, when we take it as a plant, also the body can generate it by itself to increase the immune system, to fight against bacteria, viruses, to reduce the level of pain. And what we see now is that if you do and use cannabis in a very controlled way, you can use it in a very safe way, but it depends on what aspects of the cannabis you use. For example, the THC, what you were saying, is like a drug, no, that reduces your cognitive function, but the CBD and other parts of the cannabis can be used to increase positive health effects. So, for example, in palliative care, when people cannot eat anymore, they have the cachexie, what we call. They lose a lot of weight. In Holland, we give them a specific type of cannabis, and they start to eat again and reduce also, for example, nausea. So there's a lot to say about it. Not only from addiction way, but really to guide it well from a medical point of view. But then we go into more medical discussion, but it's a very interesting subject.
Yeah, very nice. And you mentioned this THC and CBD. So what very fascinating story is that inside one plant, one substance of the same plant increases like hallucinations and stuff, and the same plant, the other substance decreases. So now there are even some studies for people who have had psychosis after using marijuana being treated by CBD oil, which is from the same plant, which caused a problem, to treat the problem. This is, for me, it's fascinating to have both substances in one plant. So there's a lot to learn about plants, I think, for sure. Yeah. Other questions?
About this, I say, ma forse non serve il microfono. Ogni tanto arriva sex. Sex. What means?
You don't know what sex means?
Actually, yes, I don't know, because every day there is some new, come si dice, news. I see 3 or 4, 5 times.
Yeah.
Sex.
Okay, I explain. That's a very good question, Duccio. Now, I explain. There are different reasons to mention it. One is to draw your attention, which was successful.
Sex.
And also, Elke and I used one in the slides before, that exercise is an evidence-based intervention for better sex. Because exercise increases blood flow, also through your genitals, and then there is more sensation and better sex. So it's not completely rubbish. There is some story to it, but it's also used to draw the attention. In this regard, it's more serious, because Lama Michel once explained that during orgasm, the winds go into the central channel. And when the winds are into the central channel, they are not in the senses. And that means during that period, you don't have sensory experiences. So in this way, there's a relationship between an altered state of consciousness and sex, especially the orgasm. Then you change your consciousness by bringing it into the central channel.
And you mean the people of your ambient, your environment, psychiatry, psychology, and who take care of the people who is sick and this kind of things. All these people have this idea of the sex. I don't think.
You're very sharp, Duccio. No, I would not say I'm an average psychiatrist, and many things I'm saying I don't think my colleagues fully agree, even though most of it is based on science, but still it's a little bit more open-minded. And so sex is not usually mentioned so much, only the part of exercise and better sex. It's only sometimes mentioned, also a little bit as a joke, but also really. But the part of the bringing the winds into the central channel, no.
Then we need more doctors like you.
Yeah, well, we need to spread the message. Yes. And these are difficult things to do research on, to the experience of winds in central channel. This is not a concept we have in psychiatry. This is, of course, something from meditation. But I think, yeah, it makes sense that I think we all know that when you have a very strong immersive experience, then the level of contact with sensory input is less. It's not such a strange thought to me, but maybe for other people, yes.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Other questions?
Oh, here. Thank you for presentation. The part of the hero journey was very clear, very interesting for me. I did understand very much the connection between the use of the psychedelics and the hero's journey. I would like to ask you maybe if you could make a more clear connection.
Yeah.
And also the second question would be about, as far as understood in the Buddhism path, is not incentivate the use of any substance that alter our state of mind. Then I would like also to ask you your opinion and your kind of commentary about this, because it would be a little bit for me, in my point of view, a bit of contradiction, no, between the two things. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Renata. I understand fully. So the hero's journey, I told this story because it's a nice story. And it's a way of looking at movies in a different way, because all of these examples from movies, there's a way to understand it. But the most important part for me is that there is an aspect of our mind which is not conscious. And it has a bigger influence on our well-being than the conscious mind. This is why the iceberg was there, right? So the question is, if you are on top of the iceberg and you know that everything underwater is very influential, how do you get there? How do you access the underworld or the unconscious? And there are some psychotherapies I showed. There is the sweat lodge, there is the fasting, there's the sex of Ducho. But then there's also psychedelics, because they induce an altered state of consciousness by bringing you to this area under the surface to experience things which are there. And this also explains why people have such different experiences, because we all have a different unconscious. We have suppressed and collected different things there. So even if you have the same substance, you have a different experience because you bring your own mind. So the function of mentioning that together is to give an example of something to go deep into your unconscious mind, which is also a hype now. But the second question you have is connected to it, and this is why I mentioned very strongly, I don't think we should all take psychedelics. You can do if you want, but there's also risks involved, this is one thing. But maybe on a more deep level, you are dependent on bringing something from the outside to have an inner experience. So, yeah.
But
yes.
Should not the meditation be also one path to access these parts of our brain, of our unconsciousness, without the use of
yes,
substance?
Most meditation masters and traditions, they emphasize not to take drugs. It depends a little bit, but most of them, yes, because you get dependent on a source of outside. And meditation, of course, is to learn how to go inside without relying on anything else to research your own mind. And also to have a clear mind, because there's also the difficulty of not having the clarity when you are under the drug. I think it's true. And I think for most of us, probably this will be the choice. Then you could have an academic discussion if people using psychedelics can reach the same state, or can they progress as well? I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. I would assume that we learn in our tradition to respect all different traditions, religions, and for some people, taking ayahuasca is a religion. It's their way of living their religion and learning things. And I think they can learn things. They can, but if I can make a choice, I would rather do without. So I think there's personal choice involved, and there's a discussion whether it's better or worse to take one path. I think we all need to take the path which resonates most with you. And then if it's better or not, I don't know.
Oh, thank you for your answer. Just one more question. Because maybe I don't have knowledge about the use for the medical, no, for this maybe use that not recreational, no. I want to ask you about the use of these psychedelics. Once I heard that if you have a genetical predisposition, you say, for have addiction, then once you use, this can be a kind of activate. Is it true this, or I just want to ask about something this, no? Because from my point of view, no, my experience maybe can be danger, not to access, as far as I heard. But I want to ask you as a doctor this, if it's true or not.
Okay, I'll come to your question in a moment, but because of your questions, I think it's very important to make clear, I am not advocating psychedelics per se.
No, I understood.
Okay, this is important. So I think it's there, and it is something that has an influence on our lives. There are many cultures using it, so I am a proponent to do research on it and to see what can be the effects, but I'm not saying we should all go for it. And I also recognize the different difficulties and also the objectives. So this is one thing. Then there's a lot of controversies and discussions about the risks of psychedelics. You just saw the slide I showed. On average, the risk is not so much as things we allow ourselves. So if we would be against psychedelics because of the side effects, we should close all the bars. Because the dangers of alcohol, also of the widespread use, are far bigger than this. So if you want to be consistent, that would be an interesting sociological discussion. If it is addictive, it looks like the science looks to show that you can use it against addiction. And so people who have a difficulty with addiction to alcohol, they can be treated with psychedelics. In addiction, you make a distinction between the physiological and the psychological part. I don't see any evidence that psychedelics have a physiological dependency. But I think there is a mental dependency. So if I would be taking psychedelics and I have strong experiences and I have many happy things, I would have an incentive to repeat this again and again. You make a habit out of it. So in this way, it could be addictive. And of course, people who are smoking, for instance, psychedelics, they can have problem with their lungs. So there are many risks involved. But I find it very interesting that we allow, also in our country, we allow marijuana and we allow alcohol, but we don't allow many of these things. So there's some inconsistency there. This is my main point. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay,
mainly for me, the part of the hero's journey was really, really interesting. If it was just a kind of fairy tale to arrive in this explosion. Yeah. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Noemen dat sommige jongeren
Yeah, so again, if you have a predisposition, because you use this word, so people who have a predisposition for psychosis, even a little bit of marijuana can trigger. So it depends on your genetic predisposition. So if you come from a family with this, then of course have to be very careful. I usually advise never to take. So if I see many young people with this, then I explain to them, for you, smoking a joint is like being a Formula 1 coureur, like Max Verstappen. Yeah? You put on blindfold, you go into a Formula 1 car, you press the gas, and you let go of the steering wheel. So it's going very fast, it's very exciting, extremely dangerous. So if you have this predisposition, then you should be very careful.
And just to add, because I think this hero's journey, it's a beautiful story, and it's a lot used as a fairy tale, but for the people who are here already for a longer time and experience meditation, it's really something, it's a story that really mirrors our inner process, what you were explaining. And I think for many people, they start to, nowadays, let's say, through psychedelics, they have a first taste of something that is more than what they experience in the normal day world. But it's very important that people find stable teachers, stable processes to be guided in this process of going into the altered states of consciousness, overcoming their traumas, facing their difficulties. So I think it's a very important topic to discuss about, because often it's either that people say, okay, drugs are very much, we need to reject them, or embrace them like we do in Holland. But finally, I think the discussion is about what we're doing now is to see why we take this, and what are more healthy ways to overcome these deeper traumas and aspects in ourselves, so we can do without substances and find the greatest bliss in this process of journey.
Yeah, and also to add on that, there's also practical things involved. So if you like to take psychedelics, in some countries you go to jail, you can even get a death penalty, just to be very practical. And also if you buy something, you don't know if the quality is good, it can also be poisoned. So there are, of course, other reasons to be careful for it, and to make the place for it. And one more thing, and then we go to your question. For me, it is meditation and psychotherapy. They are very interesting to combine. So usually we explain that psychology is like dealing with mental processes and traumas on a horizontal level. That means I have my feelings, I respond to people around me, my partner, and I express whatever I feel. Meditation helps you on a vertical level. So for some people who have no connection to their body, they don't know where their feeling is, they need focusing techniques to go deeper into their feelings. And then they can use psychotherapy. Other people have very strong emotions. They are overwhelmed easily by emotions, so they need defocusing techniques to go a little bit higher, and then they can do psychotherapy. So it's like East and West, two ways of connecting. And then you get a circle. And interesting is, if you connect vertical and horizontal in a circle, you get a helix, and the helix is the DNA of life. So you get back to the origin.
Penso che sia un tema molto delicato, questo che tu stai affrontando adesso, ma mi viene questo pensiero che gli stati di coscienza profondi di cui parla Lama Michel siano una cosa diversa dagli stati di coscienza alterati che si ottengono utilizzando queste sostanze psichedeliche. Però è un mio pensiero. O se no, spiegami come invece tu trovi queste attinenze, o che una cosa può portare all'altra, mentre io vedo completamente due cose che non hanno a che fare una con l'altra.
Okay, I need a translation for somebody.
She finds it difficult to bring these two together, and
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. So, yes, yes, I understand it's delicate. And it is similar to inter-religious dialogue. These are also, they are very delicate subjects because you deal with things that are so crucial to how we view life. It's about your whole life position, what you think is possible, what is useful, what is important. And it has to do with both with meditation and psychedelics. So yes, in that way it's delicate. In the other way, I don't know if it is, what are the difference in effects. Personally, I never took psychedelics. So I don't have a personal account. I only read about it. I did have some meditation experiences which were similar to what I read, what people experience of psychedelics. And I also see that many other people have the same. So there are scientific studies questioning people who have meditation experiences and people who have psychedelic experiences. And they find a lot of similarities. But not all. There are also differences. So they are both there. But there are similarities in regards of personal growth, healing trauma, connection to different states of consciousness, changing habits. These are all things which happen with both approaches. So I think there are both similarities and differences. This is my position. But I acknowledge there are different views.
Grazie.
Just to add to that, because I think it's a very important point, what Rogier was saying before is that what makes really the difference is if you take a substance out of yourself, you don't know what the effect will be inside. So depending on your inner state, you can go have a very beautiful experience, but it can be also very tough and even creating a disease. So what Lama Michel is explaining and learning us here is the very safe and very well guided step-by-step training to go down into these altered states of consciousness. And it's not mystic as Lama Michel also is explaining. It's just all ways of training our mind in patience, in more love, more compassion, more morality. Because as we know from the former teachers in history, by training that part of consciousness, of our mind, really creates an entrance gate to a final goal seen from a Buddhist perspective. But in other traditions, they have other goals where they go to. So it is difficult to compare one tradition with another. But I think the most important thing, what Rogier also was saying, and to repeat, it is very beautiful if you have a guidance like we have here in Albagnano, of a very well trained master who can show the steps of meditation without taking any form of drugs. And then for sure you get into this deeper states of consciousness, you will face your dragons, but in a controlled way. And I think for all of us, this is the most, the best way.
1 second, you are...
I think she already answered. But I have the same doubt than their question, probably, because I understood that the psychotics, the psychedelic substances, to me, they open the door to this Pandora world, which you don't know what it is. And of course, we can discover and we can open it and to help ourselves to understand it, our inner being. But how the psychiatric can use it, because when you open that door, it doesn't mean that you became aware of what is there. I have friends that they have using this ayahuasca, and he was very excited and it was super fantastic because now I understood, because now I know, I've seen it, I've seen the bad and the good, and at the end, he is the same person, he only justifying himself on the same rituals that he does, and he didn't. I mean, what Lama Michelle teaches us is to be familiar with these tools of meditation, and you will be familiar with your monster, with your emotion. You will go deeper with awareness. And with the psychedelic things, I have the impression that you just blow everything and open, but who is guiding you and who is giving the meaning of that? Is there a psychiatric following you in the science world? Is this the way they want to use it, or is the way to say there is a lot of things to discover about that?
Until now, it's being used in psychiatry only under supervision, so people are followed up, yes. And yes, I agree. You open something, you don't know what will be the effects. If they look only on the level of symptoms and suffering, they see that on average most people who take it, they improve. If they look at things like depressive symptoms, anxiety, functioning in life, well-being. So it seems, at least on the short while, to improve for some people, but not for all. And I also have the same doubts. But this is not, I'm not saying that we should do this or this is valid or that is good. I think in our tradition we do it in a different way. My preference is also not to use substances. But it is there. It's being used by people already for thousands of years. Same as that in some religions, they also have a different way of approaching things, which is different than our way, but can be beneficial sometimes in a way as well. So it's just to acknowledge that there are different paths and to know that there's also risks involved, and then people can make their own choice if they want to do. You know.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's all been very interesting. From my point of view, even talking about being taken back to past lives from a good therapist. So from a good therapist, if you are being taken back to past lives, it is very dangerous. I was taken back to a couple of past lives, which were quite good lives. But the third time, when I went to Lama Ganchen, I said, please, Lama Ganchen, can you tell me if I should do this just to know myself, you know, to go into my past life, and maybe that could help me a little better to get out of my problems in this life. He said to me, no, better you don't go back unless you want a bad life. A bad past life.
Yeah, so that's another example you're giving, like you're opening something up and you don't know what will be the effects. And so again, yes, I think it's true. In psychology, they make a distinction between states and traits. And this is similar. So psychedelics induce a state, which can also pass again. And meditation is more like a trait, learning how to deal with emotions or more insight, which is more stable over time. So yes, it will also be my preference, but I'm saying something that's there.
Thanks for this interesting presentation. I have just a question about a smart drug. There are a lot of professional physicians and students that take smart drug or off-label drugs to improve the behavior, skills, or study better.
Yeah.
Which is your perspective about this problem?
Yeah, very good one. So people taking medication to be able to function better, and usually off-label, usually in the black market. So the most well-known example is students, people studying, and taking, for instance, medication against HDAD, or even neurological medication like modafinil is against people who have like sleepiness during the day. And so what you are doing is then you take medication and you are forcing energy out of you which is not really there. So the danger, of course, is that people are so high that they cannot go down again, cannot relax again. So they will need substances to cool down, like sleeping pills or alcohol or cannabis. And then they get very tired during the night. They have a low quality of sleep. Tomorrow we'll look at quality of sleep. And then they use the uppers again in the morning, and then you get in this vicious cycle. So yes, for sure, especially here in this meditation center, but I would say generally in the population, the advice would be to not use both. Not use the uppers and not the downers. That would be the best. But we all do, most of us do a little bit, like caffeine, for instance, is the worldwide use of coffee is still growing. And at the same time, you see also the level of sleeping pills growing. So as a world population, we are doing it a little bit in a small way. Maybe it's less harmful, still not so good. But the example you are giving, I would say, please don't do. Because I've seen a lot of people so overstressed that they cannot calm down anymore. Abuse of medication is kind of dangerous. Yeah. Okay, so thank you all for sitting this out. Thank you very much.